Cows eat plants, so vegans don't have to. Read on. Welcome to Fontanalis, everybody. This channel is about improving the way we think about the world through models, frameworks, and metaphors. Today's video is about how vegans and vegan diets subsidize animal agriculture. I came across some information on different feeds that can be used for livestock, and specifically different feeds that can be used for dairy cows and for meat cattle. So I want to go through a list. This is a partial list, non-exhaustive, of some of the things that are fed to cattle that are byproducts from other plant agriculture. Some of the things on the list I found: baked goods, so cookies, breads, crackers, beet pulp from making beet sugar, candy, cereal, and chocolate. If it's gone bad, if it doesn't meet their quality standards, they'll feed it to cattle. They'll sell it to people to put into their feed mixes. Citrus pulp. If you drink orange juice, you're subsidizing animal agriculture. Fruit. If fruit is rotten or blemished or just otherwise unsuitable for the human market, it will often be fed to cattle. Grape pomace. If you drink wine, you're supporting animal agriculture. Molasses from the production of sugar. This is a big one, wheat midds. So whenever wheat is refined, the midds and hulls and fibrous components of that wheat all go to feeding primarily cattle, but also hogs and chickens. Canola meal. So when they make canola oil out of that rapeseed, they press out the oil, they extract 5 to 10%, I forget what it is for canola oil, and then they use all of the other solids from those seeds to produce animal feeds. So in other words, any oil that gets produced, the vast majority of the substance of that seed actually goes to animals. Corn gluten. So if you eat anything that contains oil from corn, if you eat anything that contains starches from corn, and if you eat anything with corn syrup or high fructose corn syrup, you're actually subsidizing animal feed costs. Cotton seeds. So if you wear clothes that have cotton in them, you are actually subsidizing the animal feed business. Distiller's grains. When ethanol is made, the leftover byproducts are fed to cattle. And then soybean meal and sunflower meal. So another two huge sources of calories in the human diet. Everything that they don't use to make the actual oil that goes in your bottle gets fed to cattle. Some of it goes to making soaps and other hygiene products, but the vast majority of the calories that are left over go to cattle. This is something to make people think, right? And it makes you realize that without animal agriculture, plant agriculture itself is highly inefficient. If a seed has 10% oil content, which is a high oil content, that means 90% of the weight of that seed is not being used in the oil making process. And of course, in the case of corn, you might be able to say, well, we can use the leftovers for making sugars, right? It involves more processing, more inefficiency, and then there's still going to be byproducts left over from those processes that are fed to cattle. And another thing to understand here is that plants are primarily indigestible to humans. When you harvest a plant in the field, there's a huge amount of fibrous content that can't be eaten by humans. It's inedible, and all of the nutrients which would otherwise be able to be absorbed by humans are rendered inaccessible and inedible by all that fibrous content. And we free up those nutrients and we create fat out of that fiber by feeding it to cattle. So without cattle eating the fibrous material, the byproducts and leftovers from all these different processes, plant agriculture would be incredibly inefficient because humans can't eat the vast majority of any plant. Now let's get into the economic side of things. So this is kind of just a by point, but in terms of this video, but it's a very large talking point, a very large contention if you want to actually understand the systems at play here. When we turn fields into fields of seed crops, when we put cereal grains on those fields, as I've discussed before, we destroy everything else. We destroy all of the life in those fields, including the vast majority of the soil life, to make way for that monocrop. if it were not for humans producing all this demand for processed food, all this demand for commoditized calories, all this demand for just garbage, more of that land would remain in a natural state and be used for just roaming cattle. Because when we buy these grain crops, when we buy these cereal crops, we're driving up the price and the demand for growing these crops in the first place. And of course, by growing these crops and processing them into human food and using those byproducts for animal feed, we are making it cheaper to produce animals in these CAFO, these concentrated animal feeding operations. Long story short, if you are supporting plant agriculture, if you are supporting any kind of processed food or any kind of grain, you are driving down the price of raising animals in CAFOs in inhumane and unhealthy conditions, and you're driving up the relative price of producing pastured, humanely raised animals. And carnivores are one of two groups I see actually supporting pasture-raised animals, supporting regenerative agriculture, natural and humane conditions for animals. And the only other group I see doing this is the regenerative agriculture and permaculture groups themselves. Vegans aren't pushing for pasture-raised beef, they're pushing for no beef. And of course, this has almost zero effect on the beef market. This has almost zero effect on changing the balance of pasture-raised and CAFO-raised animals. But when carnivores are getting on YouTube and saying, eat grass-raised, pasture-finished beef, that is tipping the balance. That is making it more economically viable for producers to be raising their cattle in humane ways, for landowners to convert what was once a cereal crop land, a desolation of the modern world. They're converting it into sustainable animal agriculture. All right, so I think I got a little bit deeper into that whole video than I wanted to, but I just wanted to put those points out there and just raise awareness for both vegans, carnivores, and everyone in between that your choices have consequences, but also that systems work with inputs and outputs, and you have to understand the entire system from start to finish and all of its fractals, right? You have to understand everything that's going on in a system before you can start talking before you can make a decision, right? So if you want more good thinking like this, that's what I'm here for, increasing the quality of thought available in this world. Go ahead and subscribe, and I'll see you next time.